Okay, I'm recording. Okay, so for this test here, for this assignment, we're going to do a few things here. We're going to actually put a filter. We're going to add a title to the top. Remember, this is a magazine, so think of a typical magazine. And I think I'm going to kind of make this kind of like a Time magazine because one of the things that we're going to add to it is we're going to add a frame around it. So that's going to be a vector shape. That's another thing. We're going to add a little bit of a subtitle here on the right hand side that's going to use kind of a paragraph mode. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a drop shadow to it. So we're going to add some effects to the text and we should be finished after that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do something that I think I showed you guys yesterday is we're going to put a filter on her. And the filter doesn't really matter. I'm just going to be, once you guys finish your assignment, you're going to tell me all of the steps that you did, like what filter you applied, or so and so, like what kind of, if you don't do a drop shadow, maybe you're going to add something else. So we're going to go ahead and do this. So first of all, to make this a little bit easier for myself, I have two layers here, and I'm going to go ahead and merge those layers together. I don't want those to be separate, so I'm going to right click and I'm going to merge layers. So now they're one layer. Okay. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to add a filter. So that's going to be the first thing I do. So to add a filter, you make sure that you're on the layer that you want to add a filter to. I'm going to go up to the top, and I could choose any one of these filters, but for this I'm going to choose the filter gallery. And I think this is mainly because in the past the ACA test has used the filter gallery. It has you apply maybe even multiple filters on there, and it looks like the filters that I applied for you guys yesterday are already on here. So let me go ahead and do this again. I'm going to take them both off. Let's see. It's actually not letting me take it off, but I'm going to do it so it keeps the first layer here. So each time I click on a new filter, they're set in these folders here. Each time I click on a filter, it's going to go ahead and show me a preview of that filter. It's a little slow because this picture might be pretty big. And once I adjust, or once I find the picture I want to go ahead and go into my options over here on the right side, and I want to adjust it so it's exactly the way I want it. And so I'm going to choose what I did yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and do a watercolor. And I think the shadow intensity was a little strong, so I may want to reduce some of the shadow intensity on there. So maybe put that to 0. Brush detail, I may want to reduce as well. A little less detail might be better, so it looks a little bit more watercolored. The more detail you have, I think the less watercolor is going to look. Okay, and then I think that's good for that. I'm going to also, like yesterday, I'm going to add a texture to it, so it looks like a canvas. And I'm going to go ahead and go to texture here, go to texturizer, and the texturizer is already set to canvas. There's brick, burlap, canvas, and sandstone. I'm going to choose canvas. I can scale it, so I can adjust how much or how thick I want the canvas to be, the threading, and then the scaling. If I adjust that, it's going to be how thick. Yeah, that's true. How thick I want the threading to be, and relief is how deep the threading will be too. So it'll look like it's kind of set down a little bit further, or it might be a little bit smoother. And let's go ahead. I'm going to keep it where it is at 4. And my scaling, let's see here. I think I have my scaling at 61%. I think I like that. If I zoom in here, I can see there is a little bit of a texture here. I don't want too much because too much is going to make it look really fake. Okay, so just subtle. Oh, one thing that I forgot to do, and this is actually a good thing that I messed up here, is instead of adding a new layer, I just added the texture and I completely lost my watercolor. And in order to get watercolor and texture together, I need to add a new effect. And it looks here just like add a new layer. So I'm going to click that. And where I see I have two texturizers, let's go ahead and make this top one the watercolor. There we go. And so now I should have both, and I should be good. So once this finishes, there we go. So you see I have a texture and a watercolor, and adding that watercolor on there, that texture just looks way too much on my texturizer. So, and it could be the scaling, it could be the relief. Let me go ahead and scale this up. I believe it's the scaling on the texture itself. So right now we have kind of a repeated pattern. Let's go ahead and reduce that and see until we get something that's a little bit more like a regular canvas. So now I'm down to 52%. It's a little bit better. So I think my relief was a little bit too high, and that's going to look a little bit better. Okay, so I have my texturizer and my watercolor together. Once I'm good, I'm going to go ahead and push OK, and now it's going to automatically apply that to my photo. My photo is going to have the watercolor and the texturizer. So that's done. So that's one of 5 things. The second thing we also did yesterday, and that's going to be the title. So I'm going to add the title to the top, and I'm going to add the title just by clicking. I know it's going to be one word, so I'm not necessarily going to add a paragraph or a text box. So I'm just going to call this photography because this is my photography magazine. Okay, as I do that, remember, in order to adjust the text, you have to highlight it, and I can adjust it by clicking a new font size. What I like to do is I like to hover here. If you look at this here, right next to font size, if I just hover over the 2 T's here, there's a finger with the left and right arrow. Anytime you see a finger with the left and right arrow, that's actually really good because what it does is it allows you to grab and drag to the right or drag to the left. And in real time, you get to adjust it exactly the way you want without having to type numbers in. I'm just going to drag until I get the perfect amount, and I like that. I'm going to go ahead and drag this back in. I really do not like the color. So there are 2 ways that I can go back to. Right now, you notice it's not highlighted, so I can't adjust anything. And there are 2 ways to be able to adjust this again. The first way is I can grab the type tool again and just go ahead and highlight it. And now you can see that my adjustments are at the top. The second way is down here in your layers panel, there's a T here. And if you just double click that T, that will automatically highlight for you. And because this is a title, you want to make sure that you're going to use a sans serif font, not a serif font. A sans serif means without feet. So if you remember, go ahead and find one with little feet on it. A serif font is like this one here. And if you notice on the T and the H, there are little feet at the bottom. That's good for reading big paragraphs, big passages. It's not so bold and strong for a title. So anytime you're making a poster or a title, you want to use a sans serif font. Remember, sans means without feet. So we're going to go ahead and find a strong sans serif font. There is a good one right there. So AYT, I don't think you have this one. Unfortunately, this is on my computer. But I'm going to choose this AYT Urbana Bold. I want you guys to go ahead and find your own anyway. And I'm going to go ahead and scale this down. And there we go. Move it into place. Now I want to go ahead and color it in. So once again, I need to highlight it. I need to grab the color. And typically what we do is we can choose one of the colors here. So first thing we do is we choose the hue on the vertical panel. Then we choose the tint or the shade. Tint is adding white, shade is adding black. But the best thing to do, because there are 16 million possibilities in Photoshop, the best thing to do is to go ahead and let's sample a color because you want these colors to be very similar. So if I go ahead and just move off of this color swatch here, you notice I have an eyedropper, and the eyedropper will allow me to select a specific color. And what that's going to do is that's going to help tie this all together because then the colors end up matching. So it looks like it belongs in this publication. Okay. So do I want maybe a red? Do I want something that's a little more blue? I'm going to choose the blue here for now. Let's go with something a little darker. Actually, because I'm going to do a drop shadow, I'm going to choose something a little lighter, and you'll see why. That's good. Push OK. All right. First set of text is done. The next thing we're going to do as far as text goes is, I think this is the last thing we got through yesterday, is we made a text box. And the text box is going to be for our little subtitle here. And we're going to adjust the size already, because I already know my size is 63. And for a subtitle, that's going to be way too big. I don't want it to be as big as my title. I'm going to bring it down to like 15 for now. I'm going to go ahead and type in how to use layers because this is a photography magazine. How to use layers in Photoshop. Okay. All right, so this is looking pretty good. But the problem is yesterday I was really messing with it. Make that a little bit bigger. And you can see that my leading, which is the space in between the lines, is way too big. So what I need to do is I need to adjust my leading. And to adjust leading and tracking is the space between the letters, I can go here. In my options panel, it says I can toggle the character and paragraph panels. So when I click on that, that comes up. And if you look at the pictures kind of tell you what they do. This adjusts the font size. This adjusts the kerning, which is the space between only two letters. Not every single letter, only two letters. This adjusts the leading, which is the space between each line. This adjusts the tracking, which is the space between all letters. This adjusts the vertical height. This adjusts the horizontal height. And then this is if you want to go ahead and make the big letter, small letter. And then you have all kinds of force things here like force bold, force caps, force italics. Lots of different force tools here. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and adjust my leading first. Way too big. That's a lot better. If I wanted to adjust my tracking, I can do that right underneath. And I could adjust the space in between all the letters, which I don't think I want to do too much. Make it a little bit smaller to fit in there. And I think that looks pretty good. And having the text box here again is useful because what it allows you to do is it allows you to tell Photoshop how many letters in each line that you'd like just by kind of squeezing that in. And I think that's going to look pretty good because that's going to make it kind of fit in. And what I'm going to do here now is because this is blending in with the blue, is instead of choosing blue, I'm going to go ahead and choose the color from her lips. Okay, there we go. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and, so we added the photo filter, we added the title, we added the subtitle, and then now we're going to go ahead and add a drop shadow. What's going to ask you to do on the test, and this is something that is pretty nice in Photoshop, is there's these little effects that you can apply not only on text, but you can apply this on anything that you draw, anything that you create, even if it's a shape, you can apply these effects. And there's two ways to apply effects in Photoshop. And the first way, down at the bottom in your layers panel, it says FX. Think of that as effects. The other way is you can simply double click in any empty area here and it's going to bring up the same panel. So let's go ahead and go to effects and let's take a look and see which effects are in here. And it's called a layer style. And I can choose beveling, which is going to make it look like the edge of your table, how it's beveled, and embossed, which means it's going to raise it up a little bit, make it look a little bit shiny, 3D. Stroke is going to add a little bit of an outline around it, and you can adjust how much of an outline you want around your letters, your shapes, whatever you want. Inner shadow just does that. It puts a shadow on the inside, so your shape or your words are going to look like it's kind of cut into the paper. Inner glow is going to make it look like it's glowing from the inside. Satin gives it kind of a sheen, not so shiny. Color overlay lets you change the color as an effect. Gradient overlay allows you to change the color from one color to the next. So I can make it go from maybe red and it can adjust and go to a blue if I wanted it to, or black to white. And I can make it go from one color to another. That's a gradient. Pattern will apply a pattern to it. I hardly ever use pattern. There's like bubble patterns and stuff. They're kind of silly. Outer glow just does that. It's going to add a glow to the outside of every single letter or shape, depending on what you're doing. And then finally, drop shadow is what we're going to use. So I want you guys to go ahead and click on drop shadow. So once this box pops up, just so you know, just in case the drop shadow options don't pop up, just make sure that you click on the box itself, okay? Because there are the regular styles or the blending options, but that's not necessarily the drop shadow options. So in case you're not in the shadow options, just click on the word drop shadow and that'll take you there. Blend mode, I would leave alone. Blend mode is what allows the shadows to be able to see what's behind it. Okay, so it's kind of like a slightly transparent shadow. Opacity is the same thing. You can slightly see through it. Angle is the sun. So if you adjust the angle, this is kind of cool. So if you adjust where this is, that's basically the sun's rays pointing towards the center object, and the center object being your words. So if I put it the angle on the side, the sun's on this side, it's going to go ahead and cast the shadow to the opposite side. So if the sun's on the right side, guess what's going to happen to your shadow? Your shadow is going to be on the left side. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to adjust my angle so the layers are just kind of below a little bit, maybe below and to the right slightly. As we adjust the distance on my shadow right now is way too much. It gets confusing when you have almost like two sets of layers together. So I like to keep it fairly close just to pop it a little bit. What we're trying to do is we're trying to push this color away from the color below it to make it a little bit more legible. Spread is going to allow you to spread the amount of the shadow. So you can see that the shadow gets thicker, it gets thinner. I don't necessarily want a huge shadow, so I'm going to keep my spread fairly low. And then finally the size is going to kind of diffuse the shadow a little bit. And I like that. I don't want my shadow to be too harsh. I'm going to slightly bring my size up just so it's really subtle. Just going to go ahead and adjust these till I get something that I'm really happy with. And there we go. Okay, I'm happy with that. Alright, so once you're done, if you want as well, there are different ways the shadow will appear. The traditional way is just going to be a linear effect, but you can choose other ways which are kind of fun, but they don't necessarily work as well as just a regular linear shadow. Anti-alias is if you want it to be a little bit softer on the edges. It adds a little bit more fuzziness. And then noise I never use because it really just makes it noisy, which doesn't look so well. Alright, so we're going to go ahead now and I'm going to push OK. And I'm done with that. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vector shape. And there are two ways that you can add vector shapes. And again, we're going to go ahead and make this look like a Time magazine where they have the box around it. And so I'm going to add a vector shape here. The first way I'm going to show you is the pen tool. And the pen tool I love, but the pen tool can be confusing. So if we go ahead and grab the pen tool, let's go ahead and make a shape. The reason why I love the pen tool is because you can make any shape you want. And you basically play connect the dots. So you click, 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 click. You make any shape you want and you just finish by clicking on the first anchor point that you created. And you see a circle will appear right there. And when you click on that first anchor point, your shape is now created. So with your shape being created, you can go ahead and you can fill it with a color. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. So I can make this a shape at the very top of my options. And now it's filled with the color. And I can at any time go back and I can change the color if I want. I can just double click on the layer itself. I can change the shape color to whatever I want. So you can see I can make a lightning bolt. I can make whatever I want here. Okay. But let's say I don't want to do this and I want a nice perfect shape. Well, other than the pen tool, you can see that all of these tools are meant for vector, including the type tool. Vector tools are tools that you can resize indefinitely. You can size them to the billboard size and they will not lose their quality. And the last thing here I'm going to choose is the shape panel here, the shape like the rectangles and rounded rectangles, ellipse, which is basically a circle. Polygon tool, you can choose as many sides as you want. The line tool, you can choose how thick you want it. And then the custom shape tool, there are a set of pre-made shapes that you can choose. So if we just choose the rectangle tool, which is the one I want, just like everything in Photoshop, if I go ahead and draw it out, it's going to make a rectangle. But if I draw it out and hold shift, it's going to make a perfect square. Okay, so just drawing it out can make any rectangle I want. Holding shift makes a perfect square. I'm going to control alt or command alt Z back. Control alt Z if you're on a PC. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to want a shape around this entire thing here. Let me zoom back out. So if you guys aren't sure what a Time magazine looks like, Time magazine covers usually have a red box around the whole thing. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and make a blue kind of square around this whole thing so it becomes a frame. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a shape around all of it, which is going to cover it, which is fine. Because we know that we can make a shape, and you guys know how to make shapes now. But we're going to do something that's going to be a little bit, I guess you can say it's a little bit more advanced. We are going to go here, zoom in. You have opacity and you have fill. Now opacity is going to make the shape invisible. What fill will do, fill is a little bit different than opacity because all fill is going to do is it's going to make the shape inside, the color invisible, but it's not necessarily going to make the shape invisible. I know that's very confusing, but if I use opacity here and I bring this down, no matter what I do to it from here on out, it's not going to show because when the opacity is at 0, nothing applied to it will work. It's all going to be invisible. But if I turn the fill color down, the only thing that will be invisible is the color. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the effects panel down here. I'm going to add a stroke to it, and you're going to see what's going to happen here. So in case you don't know what a stroke is, you guys, a stroke is essentially an outline. Alright, so I hope you see what just happened here. I added a stroke, which is a thick outline, and I can change the color because I did not want black. I'm going to go ahead and choose the same blue as my text by clicking in the color, going to the eyedropper, and clicking the color. And what I can do now is I'm going to adjust the size of my stroke, so how thick you want the border to be, where you want the position to be. Now if your position's on the outside, it's not going to work because my stroke is now on this invisible this artboard. The artboard is essentially your desk, which doesn't make sense to have anything on there. Centering, we'll have it half in and half out. But I want inside because I want it all to be inside of my shape. You don't have to worry about blending modes. It's normal right now. Unless you want it to blend with the background, you can use some blending modes, but I don't need that. I'm going to keep it at normal. And then finally, fill type, you want to keep it the same. And the last thing is really just adjusting that stroke until you get the right size. So I'm going to have something kind of thick, just like that. I push OK. And there we go. And now I have my finished magazine cover. Okay, so for this cover, remember there are 5 things that I need you to do. I need you to have a photo filter. I needed you to have a title at the top. And that title, I want it to be a sans serif title. I need you to have a subhead, which needs to be a serif subhead. Now I didn't choose a serif subhead. If you notice, this is also a sans serif subhead. But for you, please include a serif. A drop shadow, which is this layer style or effect. And then finally the vector. And a vector is this shape here. Remember, vectors are letters, shapes, those custom shapes. I can size them as much as I want and they will never lose quality. A picture, if you make it the size of a billboard and the quality is bad, it's going to be very pixelated. So that's the difference between vector and raster. Raster images have pixels. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. Good luck.